In this video, I'm going to show 4 of the main things you're going to be asked to do if you take on the data analysis project with the New York City schools data. So we're going to look at how to filter the data, how to calculate new fields, how to aggregate data, and then how to write a sorter in JavaScript that'll make it easy to sort data. So what we're going to do is we are going to filter the data so that we only have the most recent year. So we only have the 2018 data in our data set. Then we're going to create a new field, which is the average between the a combined math and ELA score, and we'll add that to our report, not to our report, to our data map, all right, to our data set. Once we've done that, we're going to aggregate the data so that we get that at the borough level rather than at the school level. So we'll have the average of this new combined score. And last, what we'll do is just sort that data so that we know how to write a custom sorter. Okay, so what we have now is just the basic skeleton that I gave you to start this project, and we're going to take it from here. So we have a main function, which is just a little demo, and we're not going to need this. And then these are the functions for making the tables that I wrote just to make it easier. All right. So the first thing we do, we already have data. The first thing we're going to do is write this filter function. So we're only going to return data that's for the test in the given year. All right. And I think by now you're familiar with this pattern, but we start with an empty array, and we're going to loop through the data, and if it meets our criteria, which is for the year, we're going to push it into that array, and then at the end we're going to return t. So I'm going to use the for of loop, which is a kind of a more succinct, nicer for loop when you want to iterate through every item in an array. So let's see how it works. We'll just call it D for our data item of data. All right. So for every element in data, it's going to be assigned to D, and then we can just loop through it D at a time. So now the next part is our condition. If D.year is the year we're looking for, T.push D. We add it to the array T, and I think I've mentioned that T is kind of a generic name for an array sometimes in computer science. So we're just going to call it T as that kind of placeholder for the array. All right. So now we've taken our full data that we pass in, and we get the data for the year. So let's just test this out and make sure it's working. So we're going to filter it. Filter data by year. We pass in the data, and we pass in the year 2018. And this will be, well, we can just run it just like that. Make sure we don't have any mistakes. All right. Now this data is actually pretty big, so it might take a little bit of time to run it. So here we went from 5,000 rows of data to 1,000 rows of data. So that's how our filter worked. And now we've filtered down our data, so we have just the most recent data. All right. And we just reassigned it to data. If we were doing multiple analysis, we wouldn't want to do that. We'd create a new variable to hold it. But for here, I want to keep it kind of clean and short. So now we're going to calculate a new field, and let's write that function. Function calc combined score We pass in the data. We don't need anything else. All right. And we are actually going to modify, well, let's not modify original data. Let's keep this as a pure function. We say it doesn't have any side effects. So we'll create a new array to hold this data, right? And then let's do our for loop again. Wow. You know what? Since we're going to be modifying the actual item anyway, let's just do it. Let d of data. Okay. So we're going to do a simple average for this, where we're just going to do the average, just the average between the math and the English score. So if you remember, if we look at the data guide, you can see that our object has a math average and an ELA average. So we're just going to add them up and then divide it by 2. All right, so that's going to be the simple combined average. And then we'll have that to work with in our data set. All right, so we're going to say d dot combined average. So since it's a valid identifier, we don't need to use the square brackets. We can use the dot notation. And that's going to be d dot math average plus d dot ELA average /2. All right, we'll do the addition first. All right, and then that's it. So this is how we calculate a new field, all right, and add it into our data. So let's just run that. And this is a void function. It actually operates on the data, so it doesn't return anything. So we're just going to say calc combined average, combined score. We pass in the data. And once we've done that, we should be able to see that in the data items. So we can just pick, let's not do 1, let's do 110. All right, we'll just print that out and take a look at it and make sure that that average is in there. All right, so here's our school. It is James Weldon School, and the combined average is 1.9. So below 2. So this school is struggling a little bit. And it looks like they have a fairly high poverty level. At 88% of the students live in poverty. So there you go. That's what I can see from this data. And now we've done the second thing on our list, which is to calculate a new field and to add it to our whole data set. All right. And again, we use the for of loop, which looks like this. Variable name, data set. So it's easier and more succinct than the standard for loop, where we keep the index as we go through it. All right. Next, we're going to aggregate this data. So this is going to be a little bit trickier. This is a more specialized function. So let's call it function calc burrow, and I'm just going to use the short spelling of burrow combined average. All right, so let's actually start by creating a dictionary. All right, we'll call it burrows. And what we're going to do is we will just use the letter keys for each one. So we're going to have Manhattan, Brooklyn, which is K, Queens, and X for the Bronx. This way, that's why we use K and X, so you don't confuse Brooklyn and the Bronx. And Staten Island is R, I believe, for Richmond County, where Staten Island is. And maybe we'll just take a look at our data. Even though this data is pretty big, it takes a little while to load. And let's just see. So borough ID is what I'm talking about. And let's just find and see if there's one for R. Yeah. There's one for X. Yep. K. And Q. All right, so those are all the borough IDs. And we're going to use that as the key for our aggregate data. All right. Now, in here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to count up the total number of students. Let's not do the combined average, actually. Let's just do the math average. We'll deal with you guys can deal with combined average if you want to, but we'll do the math average. All right, so calc borough math average. Now, we want to know the total students, and we'll initialize that to be 0. All right. And we'll do math average, and we will also just put that for 0 for now, but we will calculate that later. So actually we need one more thing in here. So for each one we have the total students, but we also, to calculate the average, we need to know the sum of math scores. So that will be 0. And let's just add that into all these. I'm just control clicking so I can put it in all at once. Okay. So what I'm going to do is do a variation of that running total loop, where for each school we're going to find out what borough it is, and then we're going to add the total students here and the sum of the math scores here. Okay. And to make it accurate, we're going to multiply the number of students by the average for their school. Otherwise, we won't have an accurate count. So let's get to it. And then once we're done with this, what we will do is update. Once we do the whole loop through our data, we will update the average in each borough just by dividing these two things. All right. So let's use that for of d of data. Okay. And first thing we want to do is get the borough from out of here. All right. From that dictionary. So let borough get boroughs for d dot borough ID. All right, so now we know which borough we have. And the first part is easy. We'll say borough dot total students plus equals d dot, I believe it's called enrollment. I can look over here. Actually, we want to know math tested. That's the number of kids that took the math test for that year. All right. Next, we're going to do borough dot sum of math scores plus equals the number that we're testing in this school times their average score. Okay. So once we've done that, we're done. We're good to go. We have calculated these two things, but we still need to go through and find the actual average for the borough. So what we're going to do is loop through this dictionary and just divide, to find the average score, we're going to divide the sum of the scores by the number of students in that borough. All right. So we're going to need a new loop to do that now that we have all of our data. In the chapter on maps and data objects, I go through all the different ways you can loop through a map or a dictionary. But what I want to do here is just calculate this average. So all I'm going to do is go through the values. All right. So I'm going to use the for of loop. And the way we'll do it, we'll say let borough of object.values for the boroughs. All right. So we have three things we can get using the object. We can get the keys, the entries, or the values. So we only care about the value for this loop. And what we're going to do is just look that up. Okay. And you know what? Eventually, all we need to do, our main function doesn't need to know the key. We needed it when we were doing the aggregate data, but we're just going to return a plain old array. So let's actually, before we do this loop, let's just change it to an array. So we'll say boroughs is going to get just the values part. So we're going to throw out the key data. All right, we don't need it anymore. And that also makes this a little bit neater. All right, because we do this once and we're going to return it, but not before we calculate the average. So we're going to say borough dot math average is going to be borough dot total students. Sorry, that's on the bottom. The borough dot sum of math scores divided by borough dot total students. Okay. You know what I'm realizing is that my table function to make a table is really looking for, no, it's okay. It wants an array of data objects, and that's what we're giving it, so it'll work fine. All right. So now we have the average is calculated. So let's create a new variable for that. Let boroughs get, what do we call that? Calc borough math average. And we'll pass in our data. So we passed in all of our data, which is 1,000 rows, and what we're going to get back is just one row or one data item for each borough. So that's an aggregate. We took the 1,000 rows and we compressed it and calculated sums and averages just for each borough. All right, and let's just write we'll write a little function that makes the table. All right. So if we look, make table wants the data and it wants to know the headers. All right. So, and if you don't pass in any headers, it'll just use the keys as the headers. So let's, in fact, it's so easy. I don't think we even need its own thing. We can just, for now, we can say make table boroughs. All right. And let's not print that out. Let's take a look. Math average is not defined. Let's actually put that back in and see what we did wrong. It's probably No, I think it's called math average. Math average. Okay. Oh, here. We forgot the D dot math average. Let's see if that fixed it up. All right. In here, we have a nice table. Total students, the math scores, and the average. All right. So there's some problem with this one, and we'll see what's going on there in a second. Basically, if there's any bad data, then we're going to get not a number, and it sounds like there was some bad data in here, although I thought I had cleaned it properly before I uploaded it for you guys. All right, so I'm seeing that I'm missing the actual borough, so we can just add that in here when we define the dictionary. We'll just call it, we'll call it borough Manhattan. I see. I already see the problem is with Brooklyn. And you see we forgot to add the total students. Actually, the sum of math scores. So we will fix that. Brooklyn. Of course, needs the sum of math scores. Staten Island, Bronx, Queens. All right, let's run it again, see what we get. Okay. So, I think we can round this a little bit. And the idea that I'm thinking here is that we don't necessarily need to show the sum, but just the average. All right. So I'm going to show you how to use this table function. And also we will sort them from the highest to lowest average. And I'll show you how to do that. All right. So let's just, once we calculate this, let's just do to fixed and we'll make it a string. Actually, we don't want it to be a string because we want to sort on it. Let's leave it the way it is for now. Okay. So let's do the sorter next. So the way that, and let me just show you over here. Let's say we have an array of numbers 133, 333, minus 5, minus 4, 78. Okay? So that's T. Now, if we want to sort it, we can just call sort, and we get them in order. But how would JavaScript know how to sort a complicated object like this? And the answer is it doesn't. So we have to tell it how to sort it, and that's a built-in part of JavaScript. So we're going to write a new function, and we'll call it compare math average. And it's going to compare item A to item B. And you can write a custom sorter for any object you have using this pattern. So if A and B should be sorted equal, so let's say in case of an integer, if they were the same number, you return 0. If A should come before B, you return 1. If A should come after B, you return minus 1. Okay? So what we're going to do is if A dot math average equals B dot math average, return 0. If A is bigger, we'll return 1. And then the only possible case left is -1. So we don't even need an if statement for that one. Let me clean that up. All right. So you could compare it any way you want using this pattern. All right. So let's just sort our boroughs using this function. And so we're just called boroughs.sort, and we pass in the whole function as an argument to sort. All right. So the function can be data just like any other data we have. All right. And we run that. And now we get them going from lowest to highest. And let's say we wanted it to go the other way. We call boroughs.reverse, and that'll just reverse the order of our data. Now we get it from highest to lowest. So Manhattan has the best math average, and the Bronx has the lowest math average. The last thing we can do is, if we want better headers, actually we can't get better headers, but we could say borough to be the first header, total students, and then math average. In this way, sum of math scores isn't that useful. So we can run it like that. Oh, I put that in the wrong place. I put that in console.log, but it needs to go inside of make table. Borough. Is that what I called it? Yeah. Okay. So we get a slightly neater table. Now, if we wanted to clean this up, we could go through the array and round all these off before we pass it in. That's the kind of thing that I do expect for your final. Also, if you wanted to give them better headers, you could rename all of the keys so that they have nicer headers that you want them to say. Or you can just play around with make table and see how it works. You can look up the docs for CLI table. Just a quick Google search for node CLI table will show you how to do this. So let's review this code before we end out the video. We reviewed how to filter data. We looked at a way to calculate new fields. We did an aggregate function where we combined a bunch of data to get averages and sums. And then we reviewed how to make a custom sorter that'll sort our data objects. I hope that you enjoyed this. Good luck with your projects, and we will talk soon.